Hey, everybody. I'm so grateful to get to have Dr. John Schinnerer on here from the Evolved Caveman Podcast. He is a psychotherapist and has been working with men for, 25 years?
Something like that. You lose track after a while.
Yeah, something along those lines. And so I'm just really excited that he's here with us today and the third annual Global Men's Summit on Masculinity and Mental Health as he talks about man box culture and how it impacts our happiness, as well as anger management, anxiety, depression, just like so much more, the importance of self-awareness and self-care. We've got a lot of things to get to dig into today. So, John, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself and why men's work.
Great question. Let's see. I started off many years ago. I think I learned early on that the way to success was to work hard, to achieve, to compete. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was student body president. I was captain of 3 varsity teams. I was taking advanced courses, getting good grades, doing all the things the adults around me told me I needed to do to be, quote, successful. And I'm sure it looked great from the outside, but my personal internal experience was that I was anxious some of the time, stressed a lot of the time, depressed part of the time, exhausted. I got sick a lot because I was just going too hard in too many different directions. And it made me start thinking about, what is this idea of success all about? And where is there room in this idea of success for things like connection, happiness, contentment, relaxation, really kind of more of the positive emotions, but I didn't know it at that time. I was 17. And it worked. It got me into a good college, studied philosophy, went on from there to get a Ph.D. at UC Berkeley in psychology. And really the reason I went into psychology, or one of the many reasons, was I was really interested in this emotional side of myself, because I know that the most stupid, shameful, hurtful things I've done in my life were when that emotional mind was in charge of me. And so 95, 98% of the time, I was great. And then there's that 2 to 5% where I was like, what happened? Like, who was that? Like, why couldn't I control my anger? Or why did I get depressed? And so I really wanted to figure that out. And became a school psychologist, did that for a couple of years and learned a lot about emotion there, learned about the darker side, anger, fear, sadness, guilt, shame. Left that, eventually started getting into positive psychology, which is the scientific pursuit of happiness, meaning, positive emotions. And did a radio show in the meantime for a year, opened up private practice. And the response for positive psychology was kind of lukewarm back in 2005. And so a psychiatrist friend of mine said, well, why don't you do anger management? We need someone in the area to do that. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And that kind of began me working more with men than women, although women can be as angry, just as likely, about 50-50. Just want to give them room to be angry too. But I did that for about 10 years and got tired of doing just anger management. So I switched to more businessmen and executives and realized pretty quickly that, in my opinion, their biggest source of pain was in their relationships at home. And this kind of fascinated me because I was like, it's interesting, because we start out in our 20s with this solid value of providing for the family. And yet somewhere along the next 10, 20, 30 years, it gets twisted and cancerous. And the very thing that we set out to provide for has now become our source of greatest irritation, annoyance, resentment on both sides. And I was like, what happened there? And so I started getting into relationship work and teaching my clients relationship skills to be better in relationship, which led to more recent work in masculinity and the most recent work in man box culture. And this just fascinated the hell out of me, because the man box culture is all about how we're socialized as boys and the rules that we pick up along the way about what it means to be a real man. And the more I learned about this, the more I was like, holy shit, this is really big. And the rules go something like this: be tough, don't back down, be self-reliant, avoid all things feminine, avoid all things homosexual, be successful, and it's more physical at first, competition, sports, and then later it's financial, wealth, power, and be stoic. And there's other ones, you can put in there: dominate women, be aggressive, provide for the family. But the big one to me that creates a lot of issues, and there's some good and there's some bad in there, and I think, you can delve into the details, but the one that seemed the most problematic for me is this: be stoic, don't feel. And if you think back to, and this starts at the age of 5 when we get into kindergarten or preschool. As soon as we get into groups of boys, this socialization process begins. It doesn't have to be your father, doesn't have to be your mother. It's usually friends, peers, other boys. It can be girls, but it's definitely social media, it's movies, it can be coaches, it can be teachers, but it doesn't take that many times of receiving these messages for us to quickly learn what the scoop is. So for instance, just on one phase of this, if when you're young, middle school, high school, and you show too much sadness or fear in front of others, eventually you'll get something like, dude, don't be such a pussy, don't be a little bitch, or don't be a little girl. Now there's other insults that can go in there, and please forgive the slurs, but this is what we get. And I've checked this with men all around the world, and even in like the Middle East or in Asia, they say that the words are different, but the meanings are the same. So we get this message: don't be feminine. And those insults are the height of femininity, if you think about it. And so I don't think it takes many times of getting that before we're like, holy shit, I'm never showing that again. That's embarrassing, it's painful, humiliating. And so you jump back in the man box. On the other side of the emotional spectrum, if you show too much joy, love, romanticism, excitement, flamboyance, God forbid, you get, dude, don't be so gay, don't be a fag. Again, I apologize to my LGBTQ plus allies, not my choice, but we have to talk about this.
It is what it is.
And so the message there is: don't be homosexual. And so you get that 1, 2, 3 times, again, you jump back in the man box. So then what are we left with that we can publicly display without fear of humiliation? I would argue there's 3 things. There's lust, because if I'm like, oh, she looks so hot in those jeans, that's saying, it's broadcasting I'm straight. So that's safe. Stress, because if I tell you, Alicia, I'm so stressed, it says to some extent I'm busy or important. That's safe. And then the big one is anger. And think of anger as a family of emotions. So any display of anger is safe for us: irritation, frustration, annoyance, rage, because people don't really come at us or challenge us when we're angry. But the problem is that, and this is where my anger management background comes in so big, in the sense that the anger dynamic is such that if I'm really angry with you, in my mind, I'm externalizing all blame onto you. In other words, it becomes all your fault. And if you would just stop being such a fill in the blank, I wouldn't be so mad. The problem with that is, it gives away all our power, but B, it takes away every bit of curiosity, of looking at myself, introspection, in terms of, what's my part in this drama? What's my part in this disagreement? And how do I improve? And I see this all over the place: people externalizing their anger on everybody else and failing to look at their own part. Now, the other part of this is, so there's this fundamental conflict within men, and it's, as a man, I should not feel. I'm a pussy if I feel. I am less manly if I feel. And yet I'm human, and so I feel. And so what happens when those two come into conflict, which they inevitably will? And I think the result is shame.
Yeah.
So for instance, when I was younger, I was struggling with depression. I was ashamed of that. Like, I shouldn't feel depressed. Why am I depressed? I have nothing to feel depressed about. I have a good life. Or if I'm anxious, if I have a panic attack, I feel shame about that. Well, shame is defined as the belief that you are unworthy of love, connection, and belonging. And what do we have right now worldwide among men but an epidemic of loneliness, of disconnection, of deaths of despair, of suicide, of drug and alcohol addiction? All that, I could argue, is fueled by shame. And so the one final point to this that I really like about this idea is that it's not our fault. So any man listening out there, this is not your fault. You're not to blame for this. In other words, you didn't ask to be socialized like this. It just happens. However, I would argue it is our responsibility to evolve beyond it, because I want every man out there to be fulfilled and happy as well as successful. But to me, happiness is one of the greatest goals we can shoot for in this lifetime, at least find ways to be more happy more of the time. And there's a whole, conversation to be had there. But to me, if you look at, I want to be happy, and we can agree on that as one of the things that every one of the 8 billion people on this planet desire. I think that one of the ways to get there is greater emotional awareness and greater emotional management. And yet we men are necessarily cut off from emotion by virtue of how we're socialized. So we're in a pickle.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they need to find men like you and the other men that have been on the summit to start conversations and some of the amazing men's groups around the world. So, and if you don't have a men's group in your area, you can always start one.
Yeah. I recently started a men's dinner just with no other agenda than connection, because I realized a lot of my adult male clients were struggling with friendships. And once you get past a certain age, where do you go to make friends?
I hear that from both genders, actually.
Yeah. I
feel like a lot of people think that women, like, we just naturally, we have all these friends all the time. But I talk to other ladies, especially women who are business owners, but like all walks of life. And they're just like, it's just harder to make friends as adults. We don't get stuck in classes together to enforce to interact with each other and see if we like each other.
It was funny. I was reading a review on Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio this morning. And it made me think, what a fascinating allegory for men. That we start out as wooden boys. What brings us to life other than emotion? Emote in Latin means to move. And what gives us more life than emotion? What brings us to life? And I just thought, so maybe we're trying to transform ourselves from wooden boys into mature, evolved men who have permission to feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the connection between the two main characters, right?
Yeah, father and son. I'm not sure what the whale is. I haven't thought it out that much, but
Society trying to swallow us.
Yeah. But it does fit with Pinocchio trying to go into all these kind of hedonistic pursuits in order to become a real man, a real boy. And I think most men go through that, and then they kind of wise up and they're like, oh yeah, that's not the path to meaning and purpose and happiness, contentment.
Yeah. I feel like I'm going to need to go back and watch the movie. I don't think I've watched it since I was a small child.
I gotta check out this version. Actually, I heard this version was excellent.
Interesting. There's always more out there to get to research and pursue. Yeah. So many different things. So I feel like men oftentimes struggle with self-care and being able to think that that's, worth their time. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, part of the problem I faced in my career is finding vocabulary that describes these things that men can hear, that aren't feminized. Self-care, quite feminine. Empathy, feminine. Sympathy, compassion, nurturing. So I think even therapy, right? Like men are like, I don't need help. Well, you're not broken. I don't do therapy. I do coaching. I also swear a lot, which I don't know, men and women
seems to help.
Seem to like. I don't know. I don't know. It's weird. But
feel more real to them. They're like, oh, this guy's
yeah,
gonna tell me that.
So I mean, the other part is like, I like the approach of coaching that I've developed over many years, because I'm really transparent with people about who I am, what my struggles have been, what my struggles are, the fact that I get frustrated with being human and feeling emotion at times. And I don't try and hide any of that, because I mean, the way I was trained is you're supposed to be the tabula rasa, the sounding board, the blank slate. And, you know, I just felt that was never going to work for men to be like, gee, how do you feel about that? And so I started teaching up front, because I think, especially if you ask an adolescent male, how do you feel about that? They're going to be like, I don't know. And that's a valid, honest answer. They don't know.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. We don't know when we start out, because we completely lack self-awareness, particularly around how we feel. Bad, good. Let's start there. And so I think, you know, self-care, I'm a big proponent of self-care, especially in the past 3 years, especially among mental health professionals, because I knew we were going to get hit hard. I knew the client load was going to escalate quickly. I knew that the demands of people were going to escalate quickly. Depression and anxiety have gone from about 12% at any one point in time to about 41, 42%. So it's rampant, male and female. And so all the more important for us to take good care of ourselves. And one of the ideas I try and get across to a lot of my clients, male and female, is, and this is a weird one. Like when I was growing up, I think I was raised with the idea of leave the world a better place and support and help others, which is completely admirable. I totally support that. The question is, what comes first, you or them? And the way I understood it was, I should just give to everybody. I should just support everyone, and I come last. The problem with that approach is it's completely unsustainable. That at some point you are going to get tapped out, you're going to get exhausted, you're going to get burnt out, and then you're useless. Now that may happen anyway, but a much better model is to take care of yourself and your needs first, something I'm still working on.
Me too.
And I mean, full disclosure, right? Like it's a process. And that way, if I'm working on taking care of myself, and we can talk about ways to do that in a minute, but if I'm focused on taking care of myself first and then supporting and helping everyone else, at least then I'm putting stuff routinely into my bucket of positive emotions so that I have an ongoing source to share with others. So what do you do to take care of yourself? What are some of your means of self-care?
Some of my means of self-care. Sorry, somebody's trying to join. Why don't you share that first?
Okay.
Got it. That I can handle this person who's trying to get.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
So self-care. So ways, I mean, some of the ways to do self-care, and again, I think some of these feel a little bit feminine, so I want to give men permission to do this as well. Massage is a big one for me. Going for a walk in nature is a big one for me. Taking a nap is huge for me. Playing with my dog.
Dogs are the best.
Sometimes it's just sitting and watching a movie. Sometimes going to the gym is really helpful. I think meditation, deep breathing, stretching, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. I mean, all those are good ways to go, but they're ways to, I think in terms of self-care, it's ways to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest response, which is the idea of how do we turn off that sympathetic nervous system in our bodies, that stress response, that fight, flight, freeze response, which we're all really good at flicking on and leaving on. And I think the idea is when you leave the room, you want to turn the lights off. And we just flick the lights on and leave them on. And so the system's not designed to just go on and stay on. And yet I know people that have had that on for decades. So I think to focus on how can I learn to truly relax? What can I do to relax? What can I do to build more enduring resources within me internally? Any way you can do that is a win. And it's got to
That's
be repetitive. Like it's got to be part of your habit, your routine, I would argue.
It makes it more difficult when you are out of routine to do it. For me, the things that help increase my bandwidth are like long Epsom salt baths when I'm so if I need to like listen to like rain sounds on Pandora, because that helps me to calm my nervous system. Also, being a medical massage therapist, I get a lot of energy stuck in my hands from like dealing with people in pain regularly. So the Epsom salt helps to pull the energy out of my hands. So it's not just about relaxing the body, it's about discharging the energy that I accumulate over the course of the day.
Can we touch on that for a second?
Sure.
Because I really appreciate that point. And I think the older I've got, at Berkeley, you're trained that everything has to be based on a scientific study. So it's very science focused. The older I've got, I still love that approach. And I also have a great appreciation for other paradigms and lenses as well. So, and I think when you're dealing with emotion and like compassion and empathy, right? That like in the work I'm doing, I'm often picking up emotion like I imagine you are. You say pain, I imagine there's some emotion in there as well. And
they're usually connected.
Emotion is contagious, right? So you can pick it up from other people, even if it's unspoken. And so it's interesting to me to think about rituals that you can do to slough off those negative or uncomfortable emotions that maybe aren't even yours in the first place. And one of the things I remember talking with an intuitive healer, she was kind of this ancient wise woman. And she said, well, realize it's just subtle energy that kind of sticks to you. And so she was saying, you just want to kind of wipe it off and, kind of flick her fingers like she's flicking water off of her. But one of the things I do with that now is I'll do that when I'm getting out of the shower. And I'll actually, the water becomes emotion in my mind. And I'm just visualizing, kind of shaking it off. And, there's no science to back that up other than, I think there are some brain scan studies that show that the brain doesn't really differentiate between what's real and what's imagined, which makes a powerful bridge to visualization.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways to handle that container. For sure. I literally feel electricity leaving my hands sometimes in the water if I've had like a really intense day with people. Other times it can be more visualization of like things leaving the body, people's emotions. Sometimes if somebody comes in with a really tough story of things that they've been experiencing in life, especially if it like triggers into one like some trauma loop of mine, then we have to work on being really balanced as massage therapists because they talk about transference, right? So we have to be able to be in a space within ourselves that's grounded so that we're not transferring our energy and our stories and trauma like into the people that we're working on.
Right.
Which is important. And I'm sure as therapists, you have a similar thing that you get to do. And self-care is really important for us. And I think that also in relationships, just in general, so that when we come home, or we get off the phone with a loved one or like a friend who's been telling us a hard story, that we then don't transfer that energy to our partners, to our kids, and wrong target towards them any frustration that we were not able to, any emotion that we were not able to communicate in those moments when we were with our clients.
Yeah, I refer to that as the shit rolls downhill theory. Scientific phrase.
For sure.
But so think of, and then the way I explain this real quickly to clients is, so imagine you're at work and your boss takes a shit on you, or, like abuses you or yells at you or embarrasses you or whatever it is, or there's a lot of stress there. Hey, Henry. And
hey, Henry.
So boss gets mad at the father comes home, gets mad at the wife gets mad at the oldest kid gets mad at the youngest kid kicks the dog. But no one's actually getting angry or being assertive to the person that initially got upset with them or gave them that energy. And so I think that's always an interesting awareness to think, where is this emotion coming from? Whose is it? Is it mine? And Aristotle said the most difficult thing is to get angry at the right person, right time, right degree, in the right place. And I agree absolutely.
So true. 100%. Henry, what do you think about that, Henry? If you feel free to come off mute if you would like to share it all at any point, Henry, you're welcome to trip in as you'd like. You don't have to, just put it out there.
Thank you so much. I'm a bit quite late. We have a lot of rains in eastern Uganda. So I'm so sorry for coming late. And the internet was not, but I had to fight and be here.
We're glad that you're here. Better late than never, for sure. Yeah, and then just have the conversation. Henry, in your relationships, are those that you've seen, does what John said resonate with you at all?
I've not been able to listen to Dr. John's whole presentation. So perhaps let's go on with the conference and get to know what we're talking about, and I'll be able to give a submission.
That sounds great. Thank you, Henry. Yeah, it's an interesting sort of thing in relationships, to be able to be self-aware enough to know when you are wrong targeting in somebody, as I use that term, and to honor that space and come back and be humble and apologize, and then recognize where we might feel disempowered in our own lives in the work that we need to do.
And it's confusing. It's difficult. I mean, I consider myself an emotion geek. I've studied emotions for, I don't know, almost 30 years. And I mean, my partner and I have a question, like when we get in a disagreement, sometimes we'll ask each other, is this really about us? Or is this about a past relationship? Or is this something from your childhood? Which always is like, hold on, let me think about that. I'll get back to you. You know, and it's and so the waters get muddy pretty quickly, especially the older we get, because we were carrying around so much of this stuff from our past with very little awareness. I mean, you look at trauma from early childhood, most people have zero awareness that is having an impact on their current present day relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes even when you do have that awareness, you might not necessarily have the ability to stop yourself from communicating or having that initial reactivity towards somebody. And then you have to backpedal and have a conversation and apologize and be like,
God,
okay,
are you stalking me? I'm just kidding.
No, just deal with it in my own life.
Yeah, no, and that's the part where I get really frustrated, right? Is where emotion takes over. And I don't even know where it came from, and I'm really having a hard time managing it or controlling it. And that guts me. I hate that.
Yeah, it happened to me yesterday.
It is so frustrating. Yeah.
Happened to me yesterday. And
I think it's happening to more of us right now. I mean, because I think we've been stretched so thin for so long with the last 3 years. The demands on us, the pressure, there's so much going on in the world, not even including our own personal worlds, that I think everyone is pretty well tapped out, stressed, irritable. Like we're all a little bit frayed.
Yeah. I think that's just reinforces the need for self-care. You know, another one of the things, because you asked me what I do for self-care, a couple of the other things that I do, I sometimes just get in my truck and drive. Because I feel like it's like this safe space for me. No one can reach me unless I want to pick up the phone. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes I listen to music and I just drive out to beautiful places, just like open spaces or into the mountains. And then I can get out and go hike, or I can just sit and look out over a beautiful vista, and I can journal out whatever it is that I need to. And maybe it's like rage stream of consciousness, or maybe it's my gratitude. And sometimes they go in different orders depending on how I need to regulate myself and what I'm wanting to put on the page. But really,
one of the things I love about that is that you get to control everything in the cab of your car, your truck. I mean, like air conditioning, heat, music, no music, windows down, windows up, speed, like it's all under your control, which is pretty rare. So I love that one.
Thank you. Yeah, it is an interesting sort of thing. Yeah, driving, it's a beautiful thing. Horseback riding used to be one of the things too, but I don't have any horses right now, so
yeah.
we'll just stick with hiking and driving.
Yeah, I used to play sports. That was a good one for me, but then I had spinal stenosis and spinal surgery and haven't gotten back to that yet.
That's not so great. I do carry a bucket of about 40 softballs in my truck and a baseball bat. And sometimes when I'm really, really angry, I will take my bucket of balls and my bat to a softball field and just hit them.
That's a great one.
And direct my energy in a functional way where I'm not hurting anybody until my arms or my back are like, you're done now.
And then you get exhausted shagging all the balls.
Yeah, and then exactly. And I'm like, why am I so weak? I need to go to the gym. This is stupid. I just start being like, fuck it. I'm gonna go like get one ball and put it in the bucket and carry a bucket.
But one of the other ones that I guess this is self-care. Like my favorite form of meditation is loving kindness or metta. And I use that in so many different contexts in my life. Like I can use it just as a meditation. And for those of you who don't know, it's, basically you sit down comfortable, take a few deep breaths, and then imagine someone that loves you very much. And then you wish kind thoughts upon them. So it sounds something like, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live life with ease and well-being. And you can insert your own ones in there as well, which is cool. And then you go to the two of you together, wish the same kind thoughts upon the two of you. So may we be happy and so on. And then you go to yourself alone, which a lot of men that I've talked to are like, oh yeah, that's right. I bowed out. I couldn't do it. Like, well, then that's all the more reason to practice. But so may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live life with ease and well-being. And then I like adding something like, may I feel worthy? Because I think the vast majority of us struggle with self-worth. You could do, may I love myself, things like that. But then from there, you expand out to family, city, state, country, world, and wish kind thoughts upon everyone. But the thing and it's a great meditation. There's a lot of positive research behind it that shows there's a host of benefits. And I like just having those thoughts in mind when people are making me upset. The best tool I've found in my life when someone is really triggering me is to wish kind thoughts upon them. And the most powerful situation I've seen of this in my own life was when I got divorced, and my ex-wife, I would argue, wasn't very ethical, let's say, in her dealing with it, and was on the stand lying to the judge. And I'm sitting there and I have to not get triggered by this, knowing that she's lying. And so I just sat there and wished kind thoughts upon her. May you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live life with ease and well-being. Now, I don't know if that does anything for her, but what it does for me is it brings my physiology down. It relaxes my body, and I can deal with it much, much better. And I think, if you're in a conversation and the person you're conversing with and it's getting kind of elevated in anger, I've had doctors tell me that they've done this tool, and the patient that they're talking to who's getting angry has actually sensed their calm and brings their anger down. So it's that idea about being a thermostat versus a thermometer, where, a thermometer kind of registers the temperature in the room, reflects the temperature in the room, which is what we normally do emotionally. We just pick up others' emotions without awareness and adapt to that. A thermometer controls the temperature in the room purposefully, mindfully. And so by bringing your emotional state to where you want it to be, a lot of times you can bring other people to where you are.
Yeah, it definitely helps. Takes a bit of discipline and self-control sometimes.
Oh yeah, practice. Yeah. Without a doubt, but without awareness, without practice, you're kind of at the mercy of others. Think about how easily we pick up another person's anxiety or stress, fear.
Especially our partners.
Well, yeah, those that are closest to us are the ones we pick up the easiest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. My mom and I are super close. And sometimes if I call her, and it just depends on how she picks up the phone, and I'll know what's going on. Like if she takes a deep inhale before she talks, the pause, if she comes right into it, in her tone, and just even if she's trying to keep it together, I'm just like, what's going on?
Yeah, that breath, if you can tune into someone's breath, it's a big tell. I remember my kids, I was talking to my kids, and was trying to teach them when they were younger how to breathe deeply, exhaling out longer than they inhale in order to regulate and bring down that physiological, to activate their sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. And so I was, kind of explaining the concept to them. We practiced, but then I would come home after work and they would, say something, and I would be like, and they're like, "Are you angry?" I'm like, it's funny because if someone asks you if you're angry and you're maybe a little bit annoyed, it makes you more annoyed.
How dare you notice that I was struggling?
And so I had to teach my son. I was like, you know what? Do me a favor. Don't ask well, first he would say, "You're angry, aren't you?" And then I would say, ask how I'm doing first. And so the next time I came in, he was like, "Are you angry?" And I was like, how about this? How about if you just ask, "How are you?" or "How was your day?" And so interesting how just the process of training in terms of communication goes with those that we love.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing I noticed as far as anger, which seems to be helpful to a lot of people, is this idea, kind of that shit rolls downhill theory that we talked about earlier, but the idea that anger is cumulative, that it's drops in a bucket. And then oftentimes when we lose our temper, it's not at the right person at the right time. So I would give an example of when I was married, that I would be at work at the office, I'm seeing clients all day. And when I got home, I was, maybe slightly, like a 2 on a scale of 10 annoyed, but definitely stressed, tired, that kind of thing. So not in the best state. And I'd pull into the driveway and I'd have to stop my car short because one of the kids left their bike in the driveway. So go from a 2 to a 3, get out, put the bike aside, bring the car in, walk in through the laundry room. There's dirty clothes all over the floor, go from a 3 to a 4. Walk in, say hi to my son who's on his computer. He doesn't respond because he's playing a game, go from a 4 to a 5. And then I maybe see like dog hair all over the floor, go from a 5 to a 6. Or, maybe my youngest daughter is drawn on the walls, go from a 6 to a 7. And then I, go into the kitchen to say hi to my wife for the first time in 12 hours. And I'm at a 7 on a 10-point scale of anger. You can imagine that that's not going to go very well. The odds are not with me. And yet none of those drops had anything to do with her.
Yeah.
And so I think just having that as I guess as a visual or a reminder is helpful.
Yeah, and some people might be familiar with the term of blow top.
I'm not.
You're not familiar with the blow top? So yeah, it's just kind of like what you're saying. You just like, everything seems fine, and then you just blow your top. You're just
Okay.
rah, you just like get really angry and you hold it all in until the pressure builds so much that you just, yeah.
And so I think of that as, you've got a bucket of negative emotions, bucket of positive emotions, and that bucket of negative emotions just slowly accumulates and builds throughout the days or weeks. And then you get to like a 9.5 out of 10, and you get one more drop in there, and
the
boom.
Straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, and you blow up. And so the interesting thing, we were talking about, kind of visualization as a way to deal with emotion. And one of the things I will tell clients is like, why don't you have holes in the bottom of your bucket? Like, just imagine drilling holes in the bottom of that negative bucket of emotions. And then if you extend that, it's, why is it a bucket at all? Why isn't it a colander or a colander, a strainer? And so then I kept going with that. And because I was like, well, I deal with a lot of negative emotions at work. I need to let emotions go immediately if possible. And so then I thought of myself as like a fishing net with big gaping holes stretched across a river, where that river's all the emotion coming at me. And it just flows right through me on a second by second basis. And whatever's positive in that water like kind of magically sticks to my net because it's my imagination. So I can do that.
Oh, that's cool. I remember a cartoon that I saw once, and something along those lines of the buckets, and how the one person had holes in all their buckets so that they didn't hold on to the things. And as they walked, flowers bloomed underneath where the water had been released, which is nice because then
the path back from the well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, the other part of it is, speaking of, it makes me think of, the backpack that we carry around, where we tend to throw these rocks that we collect along the way in life, and the backpack gets heavier and heavier, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. And those rocks are resentments and annoyances and hurts. And, so I'm always trying to look for ways to take the backpack off and dump it out. And I think one of the most powerful ways of doing that is this idea of forgiveness, as spelled out by Fred Luskin, who was the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, wrote a great book on it called Forgive for Good. And, it's funny because I think every major religion tells us we should forgive, but I've never found out kind of how to do it step by step from a religion. And so I think that he went through and reconceptualized it, kind of broke it down step by step. And I think most importantly, came up with where we get stuck in forgiveness, or don't even get to forgiveness because we hit these hurdles. And the two biggest hurdles are thinking that if I forgive someone who's wronged me, that I'm condoning that action, that I approve of it. And for anyone listening, forgiveness does not mean you approve of how you were treated. You can forgive a murderer, you can forgive a rapist. And it just is a way to let go of your own anger and hurt. The other big one that's interesting to me, the other hurdle there, is this idea that we confuse an unwillingness to forgive with an unforgivable act. And let me explain that, because that one had me scratch my head for a few years. So a lot of times we'll say, like, the research that he did was actually with parents in Ireland and in inner cities here in the US, of parents who had lost their children to murder, either bombings in Ireland or gang violence in inner cities. And there's nothing in my life that compares to that. I mean, that's like a 10 on a 10, right? I think we can agree on that. And an unwillingness to forgive says, oh, murder in this case is unforgivable. And fair enough, like, I think we would all be there for some time. And I don't want to disallow that. I want to give people permission to feel that, because I think that's entirely appropriate. And at some point, we can get to the idea of that this is a forgivable offense. As heinous as it is, it can be forgiven, and I forgive to help myself. I forgive to let go of that festering, cancerous anger. And it's been shown, and you don't have to feel like forgiving to begin this either. It's a daily practice. You begin it in your head. You don't need to be face to face with the offender. But it's really one of the more powerful practices that I've come across. And I think there's layers to it in terms of, forgiving others who have offended you. And when you first start this practice, you got to go like way back in your past, right? Like, I forgive my mom for slapping me when I was 6, that kind of stuff. And there's allowing others to forgive you, which can be challenging. There's also this idea of, this is my personal belief. So the vast majority of people in the world believe in some power higher than self, however you want to define that. And at the same time, there are things that happen in life that are tragic, terrible, heinous, and there's no human that we can blame for this. And yet, because our human mind is built the way it is, and heart, I think we still want to blame someone in our rage at things like this that happen. And I think in those moments we can go to God or higher power and get angry at God, which makes complete sense to me on a human level. And the way I found out about this was, I was working as a school psychologist, and a teacher asked me to see one of her students who had been sobbing in class for a day or two because she'd just lost an infant niece. And niece was 6 years old, or 6 months old, died of sudden infant death syndrome. Totally tragic. And there's no one's to blame for that. It's just awful. And I think it's hard for us to make sense of, especially if we believe in a God that is just and omnipotent. And this girl was very Christian, and I started talking to her, and found out what happened, and she was crying, and I said, well, it sounds to me like you're angry at God. And she said, oh no, I couldn't do that. That would be a sin. And so I was like, well, yeah, I guess so. And I said, if you believe that, God had some hand in making you at some level, then he also made your emotions. And so he knew you would be angry and upset with him for this happening. And in my mind, he's already forgiven you, because your anger at him is like a drop of rain in a rainstorm. Like it's nothing. And he knew this would happen. And so he's forgiven you. I think you just need to give yourself permission to be angry at God so that you can begin to let that go and forgive God. And this helped her out tremendously. And the funny thing was, like, I did a mini course on forgiveness for Simple Habit. So there was like 7-minute classes. And the last one was on this very topic, and Simple Habit cut it. They wouldn't put it in. And so I think there's a reluctance to talk about it. And yet I think it's really, really important to talk about it, because it makes absolute sense on an emotional level to me.
It's interesting. And also forgiving oneself can be just so difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Society, and please correct me if you disagree, but I think that oftentimes society has taught us that to forgive is not masculine.
Yeah, again, I would say I'd put it in the feminine camp if we're going to label it in those terms. So, and I think, forgiveness of self kind of gets into, self-compassion versus inner critic too. And we're all so good at that inner critic. And one of the things that I think we're all sorely lacking in is the development of that self-compassionate voice, that kind voice, the voice that speaks to us with encouragement, love, understanding, nurturing. And I think, I've talked to a lot of men about this, and they're like, well, I don't want to let go of my inner critic. Like, that's how I motivate myself. Like, okay, I see that. And by the way, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the inner critic, unless you're, a Tibetan monk who's meditated for 10,000 hours. But this is simply a second pathway that you can use, ideally often, which will motivate you to get to the same goal, but in a much kinder, gentler, and more effective way. And so I think that you're absolutely right. I think that forgiveness of self is huge. It's very difficult, partly because it's tied in with that self-flagellation.
Yeah, intrusive thoughts can be really difficult for, I think, most people. And it's something that I don't think that we talk about enough in society, and to release the shame and judgment that comes for most of people about having intrusive thoughts. Be like, oh, I must be bad. I must be crazy. I'm like, why is this happening? Like,
I can't tell you, I've had hundreds of people come into my office and say, you're going to think this is crazy. And I'm like, try me. And never once have I said, yeah, you're right, you're fucking crazy. It's like, yeah, it's just a thought. Like, yes, we have crazy thoughts. We all have them. We all have fucked up thoughts, but they're just thoughts. And I really like that idea from mindfulness that, it's not about changing our thoughts. We can't stop the thoughts from coming, but we can change how we relate to them. So I still have that thought in my head at times of, I'm a fucking idiot, which has been kind of one of my classic Hall of Fame automatic negative thoughts through the years. But I've also learned, I've caught it, I've looked at it, I've found evidence to disprove it. So now when it comes up, I can say, oh yeah, there's that thought. I've seen it before. I know it's not true. I'm just going to let it go down the thought stream rather than engage in it and look for evidence to support it, because I can still find evidence to support it. Because I've done stupid, hurtful, mean, mindless things at times. But it doesn't mean I'm an idiot. It means I've done idiotic things.
An important differentiation right there.
Yeah.
And when we're present, like allowing ourselves to honor the process of the experience of life. Who we once were does not need to carry on and be who we are in the now. Like, if you do the work and you grow and you evolve, Grant yourself that beingness.
Well, to bring this full circle, I think you're absolutely right. And in terms of, I think every man growing up has engaged in some version of these man box behaviors with other men. I know I've called people a pussy or a bitch or whatever those, hurtful slurs are. And that doesn't define who I am now. We have to let that go and remind ourselves that the goal is to evolve beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time we didn't know any better. And at the time we were also trying to survive in the culture that we're growing up in.
It's true. I mean, I've said that to people before, both men and women,
Yeah.
Ironically. It's just interesting. So, and I have my own things that I can look back at my past and I was like, oh my goodness gracious, I wish I hadn't said or done X or Y or Z. But that was a long time ago when I was dealing with my own pain and confusion and suffering and whatever. And I grew, I evolved, I matured, and I'm exceedingly grateful.
Yeah.
To be where I am
I think
now versus then, without judging me in my old young self in a negative fashion. Be like, yep, that happened. Can't change that happened. I'm going to only do a better job in the now and the future.
the other thing that kind of fascinates me about this is just a reminder to people listening that we're talking about gender. We're not talking about sex. And so gender is the spectrum from masculine to feminine and anywhere in between. Sex is the spectrum from male to female and anywhere in between. And so, I was thinking about this today in the shower that I'm going to do a keynote here shortly to a business group. And this man box culture doesn't just apply to men. It can apply to women too, because you can have a masculine woman, you can have a feminine man, and anywhere in between. And I think that a lot of women who are in the corporate world have to adapt and become, if they weren't already, become more masculine in order to survive. And so it fascinates me to just think of, to what extent are you masculine? To what extent are you feminine? Because in my mind, and we've talked about this, I think the goal is really to be able to balance those two for any sex, male or female, that you want to have access to full spectrum humanity, to all of yourself, and be able to bring different parts of yourself to different situations as appropriate.
Absolutely. I talk to people so I have friends who are veterans and whatnot. And so for the former Marines or current Marines, there's well, I want to be all of myself. I'm just like, okay, that's great. And I want you to be. So when you're all of yourself, what does that look like when you're with your buddies at the bar that are fellow Marines? What does that look like when you're at your kid's school? What does that look like when you're at church? And what does that look like when you're at the library? And what does that look like when you're at your grandma's house? Are you able to, because what you're when you're out with your boys is probably not going to be the same of when you're at your kid's school, especially at a child, you're going to their kindergarten. It's not going to be appropriate to say the same things, to take the same actions, just like it wouldn't be if you were in church. And it's just them accessing a different part within themselves that is authentic and just honoring that full spectrum of human experience.
Yeah. And to dovetail with that, just a reminder for a lot of men, some of these new skills or new ways of being do not feel authentic at first. They don't feel normal. They don't feel comfortable. That's okay. Keep practicing them, because when you first learned to ride a bike, that did not feel normal either. Any new skill that you learn is going to feel a little bit awkward and clunky at first. It doesn't mean it's inauthentic. It just means you're out of practice or have never practiced.
Right. Or just when you first started playing a game, be it a complex video game or football or rugby or whatever, you have to show up and learn how to work in a team. What are the different roles?
Yeah. And since we're talking about men, I'll say that the other part of that, again, to dovetail with your point, is, you go to the gym to work out your muscles in your body, or you do certain things to make sure your body's in peak operating condition, ideally. What we're talking about is also getting your mind and heart to operate at their peak also. So you can't just do the physical and ignore the mental, emotional, and spiritual. It's a package deal. And whatever you ignore will come back and bite you in the ass at some point.
Oftentimes. For sure. Henry, I'm not sure if you're still there. We got about 5 minutes left. If you have any questions or comments, I want to make sure that you have time to chirp in.
Yeah, I've been hearing submissions of Dr. John, and he talked about the healing on yourself, and it reminded me of clients who came from Ireland. I got on a safari. One of them, after a safari, told me that I was contemplating suicide. I have been contemplating suicide for the past 1 month. So I thought, what can I do to unleash the suicide thoughts in me? Told me, I said, let me go to a safari somewhere for 2 weeks. So the aspect of healing from oneself and looking for things to do, like Alicia, you say when you're driving a truck and you're annoyed, you move with your bat and the ball, then you go somewhere in the wood and you unleash those feelings within you. Yeah, so I think that should be paramount for every human, because at the end of the day, we are humans that change emotions according to the environment or the circumstances that are around us. We have to get ways of how to deal with what changes within our mind and what the adrenaline is sending to the mind. Yes, so that is my honest submission. Dr. John, you also talked about that forgiving does not look masculine. I don't know. That really, I compare that experience back here in Africa, where men are given a lot of power. Society gave men a lot of powers, even over almost everything. It's very hard to find a lady doing something. So when men here do mistakes, let it be in the society or in marriage, you'll find that person will not forgive. Who find it hard to forgive. The ego within within some men here makes them say, when you forgive, it's like you're throwing in a towel, saying that I'm no longer a man. I'm no longer a man. So I think the idea of forgiving should be less made of a feminine character. It should be made that it should be something universal to everyone.
Absolutely.
That's my submission.
Henry, can I ask you a question? This is just out of personal curiosity. I haven't asked this of anyone in Uganda. So I think you missed this part of the conversation, but one of the things that I see as a problem with this man box culture, and I'm not sure how it applies to Uganda, is the idea of be stoic or don't feel for us men. And when we're growing up here in the US and in many other places in the world, we get messages about don't be feminine, and there's insults that go along with that. If we show too much sadness or fear, we'll get things like don't be a little girl, don't be a bitch, things like that. On the other side of the emotional spectrum, if we show too much joy, love, romanticism, excitement, flamboyance, we'll get messages about don't be homosexual, don't be gay. Do you see that growing up in Uganda? The don't be feminine, don't be gay, as a way of policing men?
Yes, I personally got that so much, mainly from a family point of view when we were growing up, is that there are certain things. For example, when a boy is laughing so loud, be like, hello, why are you laughing like ladies? That is a lady thing, you see. For example, when kids are fighting, a girl and a boy, they're fighting, they'll punish the boy and they'll leave the girl. However much the girl is in a mistake, for them, they have it meant that fighting is a masculine character. It's not a feminine character. Okay, so a lot of emotions are extremely stereotyped in this side of the world.
Yeah.
There are things done, and society will actually wonder. For example, the issue of domestic violence here. It is extremely very hard for a man to go to police or the courts to say that I have been battered by a woman. You see, a lot of men are dying silently in marriages. They are extremely battered by their ladies, but they cannot come out because why? They are men. You see, they are men. They're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to show emotions. They feel small going out of the, coming out, say that I am being beaten by a woman. They feel small because we grew up knowing that fighting is a character of men. If a lady fights, that is not so common. Be like, you are lying. A lady cannot fight a man. So emotional stereotypes are extremely common at the side of that. Then you talked about the issue of being gay or lesbian. I think the most harsh place for queer people is Africa and maybe the Arab world, because here you cannot reason with them that someone can choose to be gay. Society can even come out and stone you to death. They can even fight you. They can even chase you out of the village.
Well, you know what's interesting about that, if I can jump in there, Henry, I did some research with a gay client of mine, and they were from the Middle East, and their parents just wouldn't accept this. And we did some research into what underlies the acceptance of homosexuality versus the just complete denial of it. And what we think we found is that it comes down to the core belief of this is a choice or this is innate. You're born this way. And if you think it's a choice, that's generally more of the Republican view, of the conservative view, of the view that homosexuality is just abnormal and shouldn't be, versus if you think it's people are born this way, you're more accepting.
You know, one thing about our society is conservativeness. There is no way you will convince an African parent or Arab parent born in the 70s or 60s that someone can be born gay or someone can choose to be gay. The first thing they will ask you is that, how comes you're thinking this way? You are going astray. You are becoming mad. You are becoming a nuisance. They can chase you from your home, totally from your home. They will segregate you. All the family members will cut ties with you. All clan members will cut ties with you. All relatives will cut ties with you, and no one is going to welcome you at their home. Why? Simply, you have made a choice that I am gay. You are not accepted. You are seen as a nuisance. You are looked at as a bad character. You are looked at as a black sheep. They can't accept you. But this comes to the core belief that that's how people here are raised. They are raised that any issue to do with marriage or relationship has to be between man and woman and nothing else other than that. So our generation, we have studied a lot. We have traveled a bit. We have interacted a lot with different people. So we know that the idea of inclusivity in a society is extremely paramount, because day in, day out, people have different tastes and preferences. People have different mindsets. people have different choices. For the fact that someone is gay, so why should I judge someone based on his or her sexuality? Why should I cut ties with someone because of his or her sexuality? So I think all compounds to being understanding and knowing that we are in a divergent world. People have a choice to do what they want. Yes.
Thank you. Well put.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Henry. And John, thank you so much for being on today. I want to be respectful of Simon's time as well. We're running just 5 minutes late. I apologize, Simon. It was just such a good conversation at the end. I didn't want to cut it short. But Dr. John, where can people find you if they want to connect with you further?
So the Evolved Caveman Podcast, which is on all the major platforms, guide2self.com or the evolvedcaveman.com. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you showing up today. I know you're busy, you got a lot going on, but just sharing your candor and your wisdom and your personal journey. I've really appreciated you being on the summit today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Now I got to go pick up my daughter's car.
You're very welcome. I hope it
Sorry,
resolves.
Simon. I would love to talk.
If you guys can connect at a later date. So
yeah, I would love to connect.
That's so